a short time in God's Word. Today, January 13th, 2025. We're back at it here in the book of Genesis 31 to 33, and Luke chapter 13. These chapters are kind of the continuing, ongoing story of Jacob and Esau, and continual battles and resulting in fear. And we see that in chapter 32, that Jacob's returning home and there's this great fear about what's to happen, and in that he ends up wrestling with God. And he doesn't win, right? Everyone's like, oh, he won, he beat God. Didn't win. He was desperate, and God gave him a limp. And so when he comes to meet Esau, he's kind of afraid. He's kind of afraid. But his name's been changed from Jacob, swindler, and all that, to Esau, God governed, and he just doesn't put the two together, right? Sometimes God does a work in us that takes a while to take root, and for us to really live in that belief of what God's done, that we are changed, that we are transformed, that things aren't always going to be this way, right? Because sometimes you can get locked into, it's always going to be like this. He doesn't care, he's not going to move in this situation, and we can get lost in those things, and rather than go, okay, no, I'm going to trust God. I'm believing that when he says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, that's true. I'm believing in his promises and in his word, and that he's changing me from the inside out, and so I'm going to try to live up to that instead of just falling back into old ways. And then that's what we see sometimes in Jacob, now Israel, that he'll fall back into old patterns, though his life has been changed and transformed by God. And so Esau comes to reconcile, and Jacob's kind of like, It's an interesting thing. He should be the one full of grace. He should be the one full of mercy. One of the things that I think it's interesting as we read through and just sort of reflect on God's word is we can know the right things, but we fail to implement them. And we're still holding things back. We're still seeing through the eyes of flesh rather than the eyes of the Spirit. And I think that's part of the process that's going on in Jacob's heart and in his life as he reunites here and kind of gets back into the land. And so that's just something to kind of think through and think about, is when God's working on you, there's a shift in how we're to think, and then how we're to act and what we're to say. And that we would trust that if he's working on me, I am who he says I am, not who the world says, not who I used to be. Till next time, keep growing little by little.